Thank you, Senator Kane. General, Admiral, thank you both for being here. Thank you both for your long and distinguished service to our nation. Admiral, I'd like to talk some about the NSA's policies, and I have long expressed concerns about the NSA's policies on really two fronts. One, an overbroad intrusion into the privacy rights of law-abiding citizens.
Okay, that's a good start there.
And two, a pattern of not focusing sufficiently on bad actors and not collecting the information, the intelligence needed to prevent terrorist acts. It seems to me the focus overall of our intelligence and defense community and law enforcement community is directed far too much at law-abiding citizens and far too little at individualized bad actors. So I'd like to ask you questions on both fronts. Starting out with the citizenry at large. As you're aware, President Obama's review group on intelligence and communication technology has said that the bulk metadata collected by the NSA should be held by a third party. And the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board has recommended ending bulk metadata collection altogether. Do you agree with either of these proposals?
In terms of pulling the data from the National Security Agency, yes, I believe that there's a standard that we can work toward that would enable us to do that while still meeting the requirements of generating the intelligence we need and ensuring the protection of U.S. citizens. Sir, would you mind repeating the second portion? I apologize.
The second portion was that the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board recommended ending bulk metadata collection altogether, and I was asking if you agree with that recommendation.
And no, sir, I would not. I believe we can still do this in a way that ensures the protection of our citizens while also providing us insights that generate value.
But you believe that the information should not be held by the U.S. government, is that correct?
I support the President's decision to shift that from the National Security Agency.
And if confirmed, what would be a timetable for implementing that reform?
To be honest, sir, I don't know. I'm just not smart enough yet about the particulars. It'll be driven by the solution that we come up with. That dialogue is ongoing right now. I haven't been a part of that as a nominee.
Well, will you commit, if confirmed, to working with members of this committee to implement it expeditiously?
Oh, yes, sir.
I want to ask more generally. The Fourth Amendment protects the privacy of law-abiding Americans. What is your view of the appropriate limitations on the ability of the government to search through phone or email communications of law-abiding citizens not accused or under suspicion of any wrongdoing?
I believe such searches should not be done without a corresponding legal framework for their execution.
And does that framework, in your judgment, require individualized suspicion?
I think it varies by the specifics of the threat that we're talking about, which is one reason why the metadata approach, I think, was taken to try to address that, to deal with no content, no names, no geographic location, to try to strike that balance, if you will.
Would you agree that for the government to intercept content from telephones or emails requires, under the Fourth Amendment, individualized suspicion and some form of judicial oversight?
I don't know that I would make a blanket statement again, sir. I apologize. I am not a lawyer, so now you're asking me about the specifics of the law, and that's just not an area of my expertise.
Well, I would ask after this hearing if you would follow up and answer that question in writing, and then you can certainly consult with counsel.
Yes,
but the relevance of the Fourth Amendment in terms of how you would implement the policies at the NSA, I think, is a question of great interest to a great many citizens. And the government collecting metadata, or even more so, the content of communications between law-abiding citizens is an issue that the Constitution, I believe, speaks very directly to. And so I would appreciate your expanded answer in writing after this hearing.
Sure.
I'd like to shift to the other side, to the concern that I have that we are devoting far too many resources looking at law-abiding citizens and far too few resources looking at bad guys. And with regard, for example, to the Boston bombing, the Tsarnaev brothers, we had been notified by Russia that in their judgment they were having communications and may be radical Islamic terrorists. And the elder Tsarnaev brother posted and advertised his desire for jihad on YouTube, not exactly a secure hidden communication, but publicly for the world to see. And yet, even though we knew this individual, or had reason to know this individual was a radical Islamic terrorist, and even though he was publicly proclaiming his desire for jihad, we failed to prevent that tragic bombing in Boston. And I'd like to ask you, why do you think that was, and what can we do to correct it so we don't fail to prevent the next Boston bombing?
The reality is, sir, I don't know the specifics of the Boston bombing. It's not an element of my current duties, and it's not something I have expressed direct knowledge of. And I think to comment knowingly, I would need that kind of knowledge.
Well, a second example deals with Major Nidal Hasan and the Fort Hood murders. And in that instance, Hasan had traded some 18 emails with radical Islamic cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, a known terrorist leader who was a spiritual advisor of the 9/11 bombers. So this is not some extraneous person. This is someone known to be a serious threat to this country, and a major in the military is communicating repeatedly by email with him. And despite all of our surveillance capabilities, we failed to prevent that horrific terrorist attack at Fort Hood that claimed the lives of 14 innocents. In your judgment, why was that? What could we have done better to prevent that?
To be honest, I won't answer that question to Senator Graham.
Well, let me suggest more broadly on both of these that it would be a far better allocation of resources in the NSA and in our efforts to prevent terrorism generally if much more resources were directed to targeting those who we have reason to know are dangerous. We have reason to know are or may be radical Islamic terrorists. And if less resources were devoted and less energy was devoted to broader interception and surveillance of the law-abiding citizenry, it has struck me for some time that the priorities have been backwards, and we ought to be targeting the bad guys and protecting innocents from terrorist attacks, and at the same time respecting the constitutional rights of every American. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, General.